Elena Vance lived by a schedule as precise as a metronome's beat. Every morning, the scent of rosin filled her small apartment as she coaxed melodies from her violin, its worn case showing a faint, almost invisible crack near the bridge. It was a constant, quiet reminder of her struggles, a symbol of the dreams she held so tightly, dreams that felt perpetually out of reach without her scholarship. Her days were a blur of conservatory classes, diligent practice sessions, and evenings spent patiently tutoring younger students, their clumsy fingers on tiny violins a stark contrast to her own practiced grace. Her parents' rules were a well-worn score she'd followed her entire life. Study hard, avoid trouble, secure a safe future. They meant well, she knew. Their love a heavy blanket woven with expectations and fear of the unknown. But lately, a different kind of music had begun to play in her mind, a wild, dissonant melody that spoke of freedom, of breaking free, if only for a single night. She yearned for a taste of something reckless, something unscripted, before she settled into the perfectly respectable, perfectly predictable life laid out for her. The thought alone made her heart flutter with a mixture of fear and exhilarating anticipation. Tonight was supposed to be her small, carefully controlled rebellion. A classmate had mentioned an underground indie gig, promising a safe night of good music in a converted warehouse. Elena, usually meticulous, had scribbled down a partial address on a scrap of sheet music, trusting her friend's casual directions. She dressed simply, in dark jeans and a comfortable sweater, trying to blend in, to be invisible, yet also, in a way, to be seen. The taxi dropped her off on a street that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the glittering, sanitized strip. Here, the neon glow was fractured, bleeding into the shadows of grimy brick buildings and overflowing dumpsters. The air hummed with a different kind of energy, raw and untamed, a stark contrast to the polished halls of her conservatory. A shiver, not entirely from the cool evening air, traced its way down her spine. This wasn't the clean, bohemian vibe she'd envisioned. She clutched her small purse, her knuckles white, her gaze darting nervously around. A group of men, their faces obscured by the dim light, stood huddled in an alleyway, their low voices a menacing rumble. Elena quickened her pace, her sensible shoes clicking too loudly on the cracked pavement. This was a mistake. She should have stayed home, practiced her scales, prepared for tomorrow's lesson. The wildness she'd craved now felt like a dangerous precipice, and she, a timid bird teetering on its edge. Then she saw it, a heavy, unmarked door tucked between a boarded-up storefront and a graffiti-scarred wall. Above it, a faint, buzzing neon exit sign cast a sickly green light, its hum a counterpoint to the distant throb of music. This must be it, she thought. A surge of relief mixed with lingering trepidation. The music sounded different than she expected, a deeper, heavier beat. But perhaps that was just the acoustics of an old warehouse. Her friend had said it was underground, after all. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Eleanor reached for the cold metal handle. Her hand trembled slightly, a testament to her nervousness. Or perhaps a silent protest from the good girl within her. Every fiber of her being, conditioned by years of strict discipline, screamed at her to turn back, to retreat to the safety of her predictable life. But the pull of the unknown, the allure of that secret, forbidden glow, was too strong. This was her one night, her singular venture into the wild. She pushed the door open, the sound echoing hollowly in the narrow space beyond, and stepped into the darkness, leaving the faint, buzzing neon sign behind her. The air inside was thick with the scent of sweat, something metallic, and a primal, dangerous energy she couldn't yet name. She had no idea she had just walked into a room she could never truly leave. Elena pushed through the heavy, unmarked door, expecting the muffled hum of indie music and the soft glow of fairy lights. Instead, a stark, brutal reality slammed into her. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, sweat, and something acrid that prickled her nose. Harsh, unshaded bulbs hung from the low ceiling, casting a merciless glare on concrete walls stained with dark, irregular splotches. This was no rehearsal space. This was a cage, raw and unforgiving, bathed in the sickly yellow of exposed light. Her gaze swept wildly across the room, taking in the crude, utilitarian furniture, the heavy punching bag hanging still in one corner, and then her breath caught. A man stood with his back to her, a colossus of muscle and dark denim. His shoulders, wide as a doorway, were a canvas of intricate, aggressive tattoos that rippled with every subtle shift of his weight. Even from behind, his presence was overwhelming, radiating a quiet, dangerous power that vibrated in the very air. On a small, makeshift table beside him, glinting under the harsh light, lay a pair of brass knuckles on a folded piece of dark velvet. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over Elena. This wasn't just a wrong room. It was a wrong world. As if sensing her presence, the man turned. Eleanor's heart seized in her chest, a bird trapped in a tightening fist. Zane Thorne was even more formidable face to face. His jaw was set, framed by a dark stubble, and a faint scar traced a line near his left eye, a testament to countless battles. His eyes, dark and piercing, were like chips of obsidian, taking in every detail of her trembling frame in a single, unblinking assessment. He wasn't just big, he was massive, a force of nature condensed into human form, and she, with her soft curves and delicate violin hands, felt impossibly small, a fragile thing about to shatter. But it wasn't just Zane Thorne that terrified her. Standing opposite him, his back to Elena, was a man whose face she recognized instantly from local news reports, a high-profile politician known for his pristine public image. He held a wad of cash, his voice a low, excited murmur as he spoke to Zane, clearly making a wager. It was illegal, brazen, and utterly damning. A soft, involuntary gasp escaped Elena's lips, shattering the tense silence that had hung in the air. Both men's heads snapped towards her. The politician's eyes widened in alarm, a flicker of panic crossing his usually composed features. Then, two burly men who had been lounging in the corner straightened, their hands instinctively moving to their sides. They hadn't seen her. She was a loose end, a problem that had just walked into their carefully controlled darkness. Before Eleanor could even register the full danger, before her fear could fully paralyze her, Zane Thorne moved. It wasn't a rush, but a deliberate, powerful stride that covered the distance between them in an instant. He didn't ask her anything. He simply stepped, his massive frame eclipsing her view of the politician and his men. The air crackled with his silent command, a primal assertion of ownership that was both terrifying and, in a strange, unsettling way, completely magnetic. His gaze, heavy and absolute, locked onto hers. It wasn't a question, but a declaration, a silent primal claiming that stole the air from her lungs. Her trembling intensified, but she found herself unable to look away, caught in the raw intensity of his dark eyes. Then, his large, calloused hand closed around her arm, not gently, but with an unwavering certainty that left no room for argument, no space for resistance. His grip was a steel band, pulling her forward, drawing her into the space behind him, out of the line of sight of the men who had just seen too much. Elena stumbled slightly, her body responding to his silent command without conscious thought. She was pressed against his back, feeling the solid, unyielding wall of his muscles, the heat radiating from his skin, the scent of him, clean sweat, leather, and something uniquely masculine and dangerous. He didn't speak a single word to her, but the message was clear, vibrating through his touch, through the sheer force of his presence. She was his now, and whether she wanted to be or not, she was safe. A shiver ran through her, a complex mix of terror, inevitability, and a nascent, terrifying sense of protection blooming in the pit of her stomach. She had walked into the wrong room, and now she belonged to the man who commanded it. Eleanor woke slowly, a heavy disorientation clinging to her like a shroud. The sheets beneath her were impossibly soft, cool silk against her skin, a sensation entirely alien to her own worn cotton. Sunlight, brilliant and sharp, streamed through a wall of glass, illuminating a room of opulent proportions. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the unfamiliar expanse of a high-rise suite, a panoramic view of the Las Vegas Strip sprawling endlessly below. It was a dizzying spectacle of neon and towering structures, a stark contrast to the grimy alleyway she remembered. This wasn't her small, familiar apartment. It wasn't the conservatory dorm. A wave of ice-cold memory washed over her, the brutal concrete room, the brass knuckles, the politician's panicked face, and the overwhelming, unyielding presence of Zane Thorne. Her heart gave a hard thump against her ribs. She was still here, still in his world. A soft sound, the scrape of a chair, drew her attention. He was there. Zane Thorne stood by a dark, polished table, a mug held loosely in his scarred hand. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched taut across his formidable chest and dark cargo pants, yet he commanded the space with the effortless authority of a king in his domain. The morning light softened nothing of his hard edges. If anything, it emphasized the coiled power in his broad shoulders, the unyielding set of his jaw. He was a mountain of a man, and she, nestled deep in the luxurious bed, felt like a feather caught in an unexpected current. His dark eyes, as piercing as ever, met hers across the vast room. There was no apology, no explanation, only an unwavering intensity that pinned her in place. Elena felt a blush creep up her neck, embarrassed by her disheveled state, by the sheer vulnerability of being watched by him. "You're awake," his voice rumbled, low and gravelly, cutting through the silence of the suite. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a confirmation of her presence in his space. The sound vibrated through her, a deep, resonant tone that stirred a strange mix of fear and something she couldn't yet name in the pit of her stomach. She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry, constricted. All she managed was a faint, uncertain hum. Zane took a slow sip from his mug, his gaze never leaving her. "There are rules here, Elena." His tone was even, devoid of emotion, yet each word was a command, heavy with unspoken weight. "You stay in this suite. You don't leave without me. You don't speak to anyone unless I tell you to. And you don't ask questions about what you saw last night." His words, simple and direct, laid out her new reality with brutal clarity. She was safe, yes, but utterly under his control. The opulence of the suite suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a gilded cage. Her sheltered upbringing, her life meticulously planned and carefully protected, felt like a fragile dream shattered by the harsh light of his world. "Do you understand?" His voice dropped a fraction, the subtle shift in tone enough to send a shiver through her. It wasn't an invitation for debate. It was a demand for assent. Elena swallowed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to defy him, to demand her freedom, to run back to the predictable safety of her old life. But the memory of the politician's men, their eyes cold and assessing, flashed in her mind. And then the memory of Zane stepping between her and them, his body a solid, impenetrable wall. She looked at him, at the sheer, unyielding power in his frame, the absolute authority in his gaze. There was no arguing with a man like him. There was only obedience. A faint nod was all she could manage. He watched her for another long moment, a silent assessment that made her feel entirely exposed. Then a subtle relaxation in his shoulders, a barely perceptible easing of his posture. Good. The single word was approval, a quiet affirmation that she had chosen correctly. A strange, unsettling sensation bloomed within her. It was fear, undoubtedly, of this dangerous man and the world he inhabited, but intertwined with it, a nascent, almost dizzying sense of security. She had obeyed, submitted to his will, and in that act, she felt a peculiar, fragile safety settle over her. The man who terrified her was also the one protecting her, and in his demanding authority she found an unexpected, unnerving comfort. She was trapped, yes, but he had claimed her, and his claim felt like the strongest shield she had ever known. The days that followed blurred into a surreal existence within Zane Thorne's golden cage. Elena rarely found herself truly alone. Silent, formidable men, built like Zane but slightly less imposing, seemed to materialize and dematerialize with unnerving efficiency. They were always there, a solid presence in the periphery of her vision, guarding the doors, standing by the windows overlooking the glittering city, even moving through the expansive suite like quiet, watchful shadows. She felt constantly observed, every movement noted, every private moment implicitly shared. It was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket of protection that left her breathless. She watched Zane's world unfold from a distance, a strange, dangerous tableau. Hushed conversations would take place in corners of the suite, his men speaking in low tones, their eyes always deferential when Zane entered the room. A subtle shift, a straightening of shoulders, a respectful nod. It was clear he was their unquestioned authority, their king. Elena saw the absolute loyalty in their eyes, the unwavering respect they held for him, and it only emphasized the raw power Zane wielded, a power that now encompassed her. Every meal was an unspoken command. Zane would sit at the large dining table, and Elena would find herself drawn to the opposite chair, as if an invisible tether pulled her. He never invited her, never even gestured, but the expectation was clear in the way his dark eyes would meet hers, an implicit directive. She would eat, often picking at the exquisitely prepared food, acutely aware of his gaze. He watched her constantly, not with suspicion, but with an intense, proprietary focus that made her skin tingle. His eyes missed nothing. How much she ate, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she sometimes caught her breath. The constant presence of his men, these silent, powerful guardians, initially heightened her sense of captivity. She was a bird in a gilded cage, surrounded by watchful predators. Yet, as the hours turned into days, a subtle shift began to occur within her. She started to notice the small, almost imperceptible gestures Zane made. When she shivered slightly in the overly air-conditioned suite, a heavy, surprisingly soft blanket would appear on the couch. When she hesitated at a doorway, unsure which direction to take, one of his men would quietly, unobtrusively, indicate the path. They weren't cruel, they were absolute. Their purpose was her safety, and every action, however stark or demanding, was geared towards that singular goal. She began to see the underlying strength in Zane's quiet commands. His directives were blunt, often delivered with a gruff brevity that left no room for question, but they were always logical, always practical, always about ensuring she remained out of harm's way. He didn't explain, he commanded, and she, surprisingly, found herself obeying, not just out of fear, but out of a nascent, unsettling sense of trust. His world was dangerous, yes, but he was the most dangerous man in it, and he had chosen to use that power to shield her. One morning, Elena woke to find a stack of new clothes folded neatly on a chair beside the bed, soft, simple fabrics in muted colors, perfectly her size. There was a pair of comfortable leggings, a couple of long-sleeved shirts, even a fresh plush bathrobe. Her own worn jeans and faded sweater, the ones she had worn when she'd stumbled into his world, were gone. Zane hadn't said a word about her clothes, hadn't commented on their threadbare quality or the fact that she'd been wearing the same outfit for days. He had simply observed, decided, and provided. It was a silent, powerful gesture, a testament to his absolute control, but also to a strange, almost savage gentleness that lay beneath his formidable exterior. A peculiar comfort began to bloom in her chest, a strange and paradoxical sense of security in his watchful eyes. She was under his command, entirely at his mercy, yet she had never felt safer. In the vast, dangerous city below, with the threat of the politician looming, Zane Thorn was her impenetrable fortress, her human wall against a world she didn't understand, and in her growing obedience she found an unexpected, addictive solace. Elena's initial attempts at defiance, small and internal as they were, began to soften, then to dissipate entirely. The first few days she'd felt a prickle of rebellion, a whisper of protest against the commands Zane Thorn issued with such stark finality. She'd wanted to argue, to demand her own choices, to cling to the independence she'd always treasured. But each time the thought formed, the memory of the politician's cold eyes, of the burly men who had looked at her like a problem to be erased, would flash in her mind, swiftly followed by the towering image of Zane, his body an impenetrable shield. She found herself, almost without conscious thought, instinctively obeying. His voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the high-rise suite, was never raised. Yet it carried an absolute authority that left no room for doubt. When he said, "Eat," she ate. When he indicated a specific chair, she sat. There was no negotiation, no questioning. And the strange thing was, in her compliance, she discovered a profound and unsettling peace. She began to recognize the brutal logic in his blunt instructions. His commands, though stripped of gentleness, were always geared towards her safety. He wasn't trying to break her spirit, he was trying to keep her alive. This realization was a slow, creeping comfort, a warmth spreading through the terror that had initially gripped her. When she followed his directives, a palpable sense of protection enveloped her, a feeling more solid and reliable than anything she had ever known. The new clothes he'd provided were soft against her skin, a silent testament to his observation. He hadn't asked her size, he had simply known. And then, one quiet afternoon, she found it. Tucked into a corner of the vast living area, almost casually placed, was a small foam practice pad for a violin. It wasn't her instrument, of course, but it was enough to silently practice her fingering, to keep her calluses from softening. He had noticed her restless hands, her longing glances at the empty space where her violin should have been. It was a gesture of stark, almost tender consideration, a stark contrast to his intimidating presence, and it pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. The forced proximity deepened the bond between them, weaving a complex tapestry of fear, dependence, and an unexpected addictive solace. She was constantly aware of him, the quiet power that radiated from him, the subtle shift in the air when he entered a room. His presence was a heavy blanket, sometimes suffocating, sometimes incredibly warm. She would catch herself watching him, her gaze lingering on the hard lines of his jaw, the intricate artwork of his tattoos, the way his muscles flexed even when he was still. Elena started to trust his instincts, even if they were born of a world she could barely fathom. He moved through his dangerous domain with an unerring certainty, a predator's grace that never faltered. She saw him intercepting hushed phone calls, his face unreadable, his voice low and dangerous, and she knew he was fighting battles on her behalf. Battles she was too soft, too innocent to comprehend. Increasingly, she found herself seeking his gaze. In the vastness of the suite, with the city lights blazing outside like a million indifferent eyes, his dark, intense stare became her anchor. It was a silent conversation, a constant reaffirmation of her place under his protection. When his eyes met hers, a strange sense of calm settled over her, a deep, quiet certainty that no harm could reach her as long as he was near. His control, once a source of terror, had become a strange, potent comfort, a powerful current she surrendered to completely. She felt safer than she had ever felt in her meticulously ordered life. Paradoxically, in the presence of this dangerous, powerful man, this enforcer who commanded an underground empire, Eleanor found a security that transcended logic. Her sheltered existence had taught her to fear the unknown, to cling to rules and predictability. But Zane Thorne, with his unwavering dominance and his silent absolute claim, had shown her a different kind of safety. It was a fierce, unyielding protection that demanded her submission, but gave her an unshakable shield in return. He was learning her gentle rhythms, and in his own demanding way, subtly altering his formidable protection to perfectly suit her. She was his, and in that undeniable truth, she found her unexpected haven. The quiet, almost hypnotic rhythm of the high-rise suite, a strange blend of opulence and silent command, began to fray at the edges. Eleanor, who had found a fragile, unsettling peace in Zane's absolute protection, felt a familiar tremor of unease resurface. It started subtly, with hushed tones from the television in the vast living area. She would catch glimpses of news reports, not directly about her, but about the politicians she had seen. The anchors spoke in grave voices, hinting at an ongoing investigation, a political scandal brewing, and whispers of a missing witness. Each mention, however veiled, sent a jolt of cold fear through her. The comfortable illusion of her golden cage, of being safely insulated from the outside world, began to crack. The soft silk sheets, the exquisite meals, the constant, silent presence of Zane's men, all of it suddenly felt less like protection and more like a flimsy barrier against a very real, very dangerous external threat. Her heart, which had just begun to settle into the strange cadence of his world, now pounded with a frantic, familiar beat. Zane's demeanor hardened. The subtle shifts in his protective gestures, once almost tender in their quiet provision, became stark, absolute commands. She noticed the lines around his eyes deepening, his jaw setting with a more pronounced rigidity. His gaze, always intense, now carried an even sharper edge, constantly assessing, constantly vigilant. The air around him, already charged with power, grew heavy with a palpable tension. One evening, as the neon lights of the strip began to paint the sky outside the panoramic windows, Zane approached her. He had been on a call, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed from his private office. Now he stood before her, a formidable silhouette against the glittering city, his presence so vast it seemed to consume the air around her. Eleanor instinctively straightened, her pulse quickening. "They're looking for you, Elena," he stated, his voice devoid of any softness, cutting through the thin veil of her fragile peace. He didn't mince words, didn't try to cushion the blow. His world was too harsh for such niceties. "The politicians' men, they know you saw him. They know you could tie him to what happened here." Her breath hitched in her throat. The casual, almost clinical way he delivered the grim truth sent a fresh wave of terror through her. It was one thing to feel a vague sense of danger. It was another entirely to have it laid out so explicitly. "They want to silence you," he continued, his dark eyes boring into hers, unwavering, demanding her full attention. "Permanently." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Permanently. The word hung in the air, heavy and chilling, painting a vivid, terrifying picture in her mind. Her carefully constructed life, her dreams of music and a safe future, all of it could be erased in an instant. The fear that had always been a distant whisper now screamed in her ears. She felt impossibly vulnerable, a delicate bird caught in the crosshairs of a brutal hunt. Zane watched her. his expression unreadable. Then he turned, his massive frame radiating an almost violent resolve. He barked orders into a comms device, his voice low but sharp, sending his men into a flurry of heightened activity. More of them appeared, silent and watchful. Their positions shifted, creating an even tighter cordon around the suite. The fortress he had built around her tightened, becoming less of a comfortable haven and more of an impenetrable cage. Later that night, as she lay in the vast, luxurious bed, trying to still her racing heart, she heard him. Zane was speaking to one of his most trusted enforcers, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that carried through the open doorway. "Listen to me," he commanded, the words like chiseled stone. "You and every man under my command. No one gets near her, not a single soul. If anyone so much as looks at her wrong, if they try to touch her." His voice dropped to a chilling whisper, heavy with unspoken threat. "Touch her and die." The words reverberated through Eleanor, a stark, terrifying promise. It wasn't just a threat to his enemies. It was a declaration of ownership, a primal, absolute claim. Her fear intensified, but woven through it, a strange, undeniable comfort bloomed. He meant it. He would protect her, absolutely and ruthlessly. The external threat felt more palpable than ever before, a shadow lengthening over the strip. But Zane Thorn, in his terrifying, unyielding dominance, was her shield. Her vulnerability was immense, but it only drove her deeper into the fierce, protective embrace of the man who now commanded her very existence. Elena was rarely left alone now. The spacious suite, once a symbol of her gilded captivity, became a constant, watchful arena. Zane's fighters, formidable men with quiet eyes and coiled strength, were her constant shadows. They never spoke to her, never acknowledged her directly, but they were always there. A presence in the corner of her vision, a subtle shift in the air, the soft thud of a heavy boot beyond a closed door. Even when she retreated to the bedroom, the knowledge of their proximity was a heavy blanket, a reminder that she was always seen, always guarded. There was no true solitude, only the illusion of it within the fortress of their flesh. She observed their unwavering loyalty to Zane, a silent, absolute devotion that resonated through their every action. When he entered a room, a subtle ripple of deference passed through them. Shoulders straightened, gazes dropped, a quiet respect that spoke volumes more than any shouted command. She saw the depth of his power, not just in his physical presence, but in the unquestioning obedience he commanded from men hardened by his world. It was a power that created an impenetrable wall around her, a constant living shield against the unseen dangers lurking outside. Zane, in turn, moved with a controlled intensity, a predator orchestrating a complex hunt. Elena would catch glimpses of him on his secure comms, his voice low and deliberate, his face a mask of ruthless calculation. He was moving pieces on a chessboard she couldn't fully comprehend, diverting attention, controlling narratives, blurring the trails that might lead back to her. He was making her disappear, not physically, but from the dangerous radar of the politician, weaving a web of misdirection and false leads that she knew instinctively would be impossible to untangle. He was a master of his domain, and she was an unwitting pawn, safe only within his formidable strategy. The tension in the suite was a living thing, a low hum beneath the surface of their enforced calm. It began with subtle shifts, a tightening in the shoulders of the men guarding the doors, a prolonged, unblinking stare from one of them as he looked out over the city. Then came the phone calls, not to Zane directly, but to numbers he had placed for such purposes. Elena would sometimes overhear snippets, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, followed by a chilling silence. He never confirmed her suspicions, but she knew with a cold certainty that someone was asking questions. Someone was trying to find her. One afternoon, a sleek, dark car was seen lingering for too long on the street below, its tinted windows offering no glimpse of its occupants. The report came to Zane, quiet and immediate. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of fear, a cold hand squeezing her heart. But Zane merely listened, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing to dangerous slits. He didn't betray a hint of panic. Instead, he radiated a terrifying, controlled fury. He intercepted every attempt, every discreet inquiry, every anonymous probe, with a ruthlessness that both terrified and reassured Elena. She wouldn't see the direct confrontation, but she would feel the ripple effect. A new, more intense vigilance from his men, a subtle change in the air, a sense of a perimeter being reinforced. She knew he was sending clear, brutal warnings to anyone who dared approach, establishing an invisible, deadly line that no one could cross. He didn't need to explain the methods. The results were evident in the unbroken safety of her confinement. Elena's role had shifted completely. There was no room for questions, no space for defiance. Her only purpose was to follow his lead, to trust implicitly, to remain a quiet, compliant presence in his world. And she did. With every subtle threat that emerged from the shadows, with every ruthless counter-move Zane made, her trust in him solidified into an unbreakable conviction. She was vulnerable, yes, a soft, fragile thing in a world of sharp edges. But Zane Thorn was her unyielding shield, her fortress of flesh, and in his absolute protection, she found a strange, profound peace. No one could get to her, not as long as he stood between her and the storm. The oppressive quiet within the suite thickened, heavy with unspoken threats. After the incident with the lingering car, a new layer of vigilance had settled over Zane's men, their faces grim, their movements sharper. Elena felt the subtle shift, the way their gazes, when they swept the panoramic windows, held a harder edge. It was the calm before a storm, she knew, a breath held taut before a violent release. Her heart remained a frantic bird, fluttering against the bars of her ribs, but beneath the fear, a strange, resilient core was beginning to form, hardened by the sheer inevitability of Zane's world. She was in the vast living area, trying to focus on a book, a futile effort, when the hushed whispers began. Two of Zane's enforcers, usually silent as shadows, were speaking in low, clipped tones near the far wall. Their backs were to her, but the intensity of their voices, the dark, satisfied undertone, carried across the polished floors. Elena strained to listen, her blood running cold. "Thorn made his point," one of them muttered, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Took a piece of that idiot who thought he could get close. Sent him back to his boss with a message etched on his face." The other chuckled, a low, rough sound. "No one's going to question who she belongs to now, not after that display. They'll think twice before sniffing around again." Eleanor's breath hitched. She didn't need to hear the details. The implication was brutal, immediate, and utterly terrifying. Zane had acted. He had delivered his warning, not with words, but with a violence so visceral it resonated even in the hushed accounts of his men. A wave of nausea washed over her, her stomach clenching, her gentle world. Her aversion to any form of aggression recoiled from the image forming in her mind. This was the dark reality of Zane's domain, a place where warnings were carved in flesh and silence was bought with pain. Later, Zane entered the room. He moved with his usual quiet power, but there was a subtle tautness to his broad shoulders, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of something metallic clinging to him that Elena, with her heightened senses, detected instantly. His dark eyes swept over her, a brief, assessing glance that held no apology, no explanation, just a stark, unyielding resolve. He didn't need to confirm the whispers. His very presence was the confirmation. Eleanor felt a profound terror, a chilling understanding of the depths of his ruthlessness. This was the man who had claimed her, the man whose hands, she now knew, were capable of such devastating force. He was a predator, an enforcer, a king in a kingdom built on raw power and intimidation, and she, a sheltered violin student, was utterly at his mercy. Yet, as the horror swirled within her, another, more unsettling emotion began to surface. It was a cold, hard truth, undeniable and absolute. This violence, this brutal display, had been for her. It was the price of her silence, yes, but more profoundly, it was the price of her safety. He had drawn a line in blood, a clear, unmistakable declaration to anyone who dared to threaten what was his. The politicians' men would know now. They would understand that to touch Elena Vance was to invite Zane Thorne's unbridled wrath. She looked at him, at the hard planes of his face, the unwavering intensity in his obsidian eyes. He wasn't a hero in any sense she understood. He was dangerous, ruthless, a force of nature that shattered conventions and embraced brutality. But in that moment, seeing the quiet, undeniable proof of his actions, Elena felt an unshakable certainty settle in her heart. He would shield her. He would protect her from the darkness of his world, no matter the cost, no matter the methods. Her vulnerability, once a source of paralyzing fear, now became a testament to her reliance on his strength. She was soft, fragile, utterly incapable of navigating the treacherous currents that flowed beneath the city's glittering surface. But Zane Thorne was not. He was the storm, the immovable object, the ultimate protector, and in his cold, calculating embrace of violence, in his absolute claim over her, Elena found a strange, terrifying peace. She was his, and as long as that truth held, she was safe. The weight of his world was immense, but the security it offered was absolute, and addictively she leaned into it. The air within the high-rise suite had grown impossibly heavy, thick with a palpable tension that hummed beneath Elena's skin. The hushed reports from the news, the lingering car, the brutal warning Zane had delivered, it all culminated in a suffocating sense of impending doom. Zane's men were like statues, their faces etched with a grim vigilance, their movements sharper, their eyes constantly sweeping the panoramic windows as if expecting an attack from the glittering city itself. Elena's stomach was a knot of dread, her violin practice pad lying untouched, the familiar comfort of music now an impossible distraction. The escalation came with a chilling abruptness. A small, unmarked package, innocuous in its simplicity, was delivered to the suite's secure receiving area. It contained nothing but a single, pristine white rose, its petals already beginning to wilt, and a small, folded note with a familiar, elegant script. Elena didn't see the package herself, but she saw the immediate, visceral reaction it elicited from Zane's men. Their faces went cold. Their bodies tensed, and the suite became utterly silent, a vacuum of held breaths. Then Zane emerged from his private office, the note clutched in his large hand. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek, and his dark eyes, usually so controlled, burned with a terrifying, contained fury. He moved with a predator's grace, cutting through the silence of the room until he stood directly before Elena, his presence so overwhelming it stole the air from her lungs. She instinctively braced herself, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing instinctively that this was it. The storm had finally arrived. "We have to talk, Elena." His voice rumbled, low and gravelly, devoid of any preamble. It wasn't an invitation, but a command. And she nodded, her throat too tight to speak. He held out the note, his gaze unyielding. "This was sent by the politician's people. It's a message." Eleanor took the small slip of paper, her fingers trembling. The script, neat and precise, was instantly recognizable. Her uncle's handwriting, her conservative scholarship-sponsoring uncle. A wave of confusion, then cold horror, washed over her as she read the single, chilling sentence. "The loose end is yours to contain, Zane. Keep her quiet, or she becomes our problem." Eleanor stared at the words, her mind refusing to process them. Her uncle. The man who had always preached integrity, who had tirelessly advocated for her scholarship, who had always been a bastion of her parents' safe, predictable world. He was in league with a dangerous politician. He had offered her, his own niece, as a scapegoat, a convenient problem to be contained. The safe world she had believed in, the very foundation of her existence, shattered into a million irreparable pieces around her. It was a betrayal so profound, so utterly unthinkable, it left her breathless, hollowed out. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, blurring the edges of the room. She looked up at Zane, her face a mask of devastation and confusion. My uncle?" She whispered, the words barely audible. He wouldn't." Zane watched her, his expression grim, but his voice was unwavering. "He would. He did. He wanted to protect his own interests, his reputation. You were a convenient fall guy, Elena. A small, easily disposable piece in a much bigger game." The brutality of his words, though painful, resonated with a terrible truth. She was a pawn, offered up by her own blood. The betrayal twisted in her gut, a sharp, agonizing ache. The safe life she had clung to, the rules she had followed, the expectations that had defined her, all of it had been a carefully constructed lie. Then Zane leaned in, his voice dropping, though the power in it remained absolute. "But you weren't just a pawn to me." Eleanor looked up, fresh tears streaming down her face, her gaze locking onto his. "Long before you walked into my room, Eleanor," he continued, his voice a low rumble, "I knew who you were. I saw you play at a charity concert for your academy. I heard your music." Her breath hitched. He had seen her, known her, before any of this. "When your uncle started making deals with the politician, deals that threatened your academy's funding, I warned my boss to keep your name off any contracts, any agreements. I even threw a fixed fight, took a dive, to ensure your scholarship, your future, remained untouched." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, yet they were not painful. They were overwhelming, astonishing, a revelation that shook her to her very core. He had been protecting her, quietly, silently, long before she had stumbled into his dangerous world. He had seen her, truly seen her, and acted to shield her dreams, not just her life. Her uncle's betrayal had splintered her world, leaving her adrift and utterly lost. But Zane's revelation, his deep, long-standing, and utterly hidden protection, suddenly became the only solid ground beneath her. The devastation of betrayal was immediately followed by an overwhelming, dizzying realization of his devotion, a protection that transcended the brutal circumstances of their meeting. He hadn't just claimed her out of necessity. He had chosen her, protected her, long before she even knew he existed. Elena stared at him, her vision blurred by tears, but a different kind of feeling was stirring in her chest. It was a profound, almost terrifying sense of gratitude, an unshakable certainty that this formidable, dangerous man was her only true anchor. He was unwavering, dominant, but beneath the hardened exterior he had moved mountains for her, silently, without expectation. The strings of her life, once tangled and broken by betrayal, were now, she realized, being held by his powerful protective hands. And in that terrifying, exhilarating truth, she found an unexpected, absolute solace. The revelation of her uncle's betrayal had ripped a gaping hole in Elena's world, leaving her adrift and disoriented. The man who had been a pillar of her family's values, a quiet supporter of her dreams, had casually offered her up as a sacrifice. Her safe, predictable life, the very foundation of her identity, crumbled into dust. She felt a profound, chilling emptiness. But then, Zane's words, his quiet confession of long-held, secret protection, had slammed into the void, a powerful, unexpected anchor in the swirling chaos. He had known her, watched her, protected her long before she even knew his name. The raw devastation of betrayal warred with an overwhelming, dizzying sense of his unexpected devotion. Zane stood before her, a formidable, unyielding presence. He didn't soften the blow of her uncle's treachery, his face grim, his eyes dark with a cold, almost predatory resolve. He simply let the truth hang between them, allowing her to grapple with its brutal reality before reiterating his own absolute commitment. "He saw you as a liability," Zane's voice rumbled, low and unwavering. "I see you as mine, and no one touches what's mine." His words were a steel-edged declaration, a primal assertion of ownership that left no room for question. It wasn't a gentle offer of comfort, but a stark, absolute promise of protection, a vow forged in the ruthless fires of his world. Elena's trembling intensified, but it was no longer just fear. It was an unsettling mix of terror and a strange, profound relief. Her emotional anchor, once firmly rooted in the illusion of family and a safe future, now shifted irrevocably to him, the man who had once terrified her. The dangerous enforcer she had stumbled upon was now the only solid ground she knew. Her uncle's betrayal had severed her from her past, but Zane's unwavering claim pulled her into his present, into his formidable embrace. She looked at him, at the hard lines of his jaw, the unyielding power in his dark eyes, and in that moment she knew, with an absolute certainty that resonated deep in her soul, that he was her only protector. Later that evening, as the city lights began to glimmer below, Zane moved. "Get dressed," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly note that vibrated through the quiet of the suite. "You're coming with me." Eleanor didn't hesitate. There was no thought of argument, no flicker of rebellion. Her body, her mind, responded instantly to his directive. She dressed in the soft, dark clothes he had provided, her movements automatic, her focus entirely on him. The sheer force of his presence, the unspoken authority in his stance, was magnetic. She followed him out of the suite, past the silent, watchful men who guarded the doors, and into the private elevator. The journey down was a blur of heightened senses, the hum of the machinery, the subtle scent of leather, and Zane's unique masculine scent, all blending into a symphony of his world. They moved through the labyrinthine back passages of the building, a hidden network of corridors and service entrances, until a heavy, unmarked door swung open, revealing a familiar, yet entirely transformed scene. The throbbing bass of music, the roar of a crowd, washed over her, a wave of raw, untamed energy. They were at the Fight Club, but this wasn't the blood-spattered prep room. Zane led her not to the main arena, but to a secure, private section overlooking it. It was a secluded box, shielded by thick, dark glass, offering a panoramic view of the pulsating chaos below. The air was thick with sweat, anticipation, and the primal scent of aggression, yet within their private space it was strangely quiet, a contained bubble of observation. From this vantage point, Elena saw him in his true domain. The underground arena pulsed with a vibrant, dangerous life, and Zane, standing beside her, was its undisputed king. Fighters and handlers moved with deference, their eyes seeking him out, acknowledging his presence with subtle nods and respectful distance. He commanded this world, his power palpable, a tangible force that vibrated through the very concrete of the building. She saw the intricate network of his influence, the absolute control he wielded over every aspect of this brutal kingdom. He didn't speak, but his gaze, sharp and intense, swept over the arena, assessing, planning, calculating. Elena watched him, her eyes fixed on the hard planes of his face, the coiled power in his broad shoulders. His focus was absolute, his mind already mapping out the intricate dance of strategy and force that would unfold. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a master strategist, a silent conductor of controlled chaos. In the midst of the roaring crowd, the flashing lights, and the palpable tension, a profound certainty settled deep within Elena. Her world had been shattered, her trust betrayed by those she had believed in. But Zane Thorn, with his unyielding shield, his silent declarations, and his brutal, absolute claim, was her new reality. He didn't offer soft words or gentle reassurances. He offered action, unwavering protection, and a fierce, undeniable commitment. She knew with every fiber of her being that he would go to any length, embrace any savagery to protect her. And in that terrifying, absolute knowledge, Elena found herself, completely and irrevocably, safe under his unyielding shield. The truth of her uncle's betrayal had left Elena raw, a gaping wound where her trust had once been. The carefully constructed world of her past, a life built on rules and expectations, had been revealed as a fragile illusion. Yet, amidst the wreckage, Zane's unwavering presence had become her unexpected sanctuary. His blunt revelations, devoid of any attempt to soften the blow, had paradoxically forged an unshakable faith in his strength. A profound, quiet solace that rooted itself deep in her heart. He was dangerous, ruthless, a force that bent the world to his will. But he was also hers, and in that absolute claim, she found an undeniable peace. She watched him from a distance in the high-rise suite, a silent observer of his formidable preparations. He moved with a focused intensity, his large frame radiating an almost physical hum of suppressed power. Papers with intricate diagrams and scribbled notes, maps of the city, and communication devices were spread across the vast, dark table in his office. He wasn't just reacting to the threat, he was anticipating it, dissecting it, meticulously planning every counter-move with the strategic mind of a general. Elena saw the cold, ruthless precision in his actions, the unwavering certainty with which he orchestrated his world, and it only deepened her trust. He was a storm, and she, sheltered by his immense shadow, felt strangely safe within his eye. A palpable tension hung in the air, a heavy, almost suffocating quiet that spoke of an impending reckoning. The city outside, usually a symphony of distant hums and sirens, seemed muted, holding its breath. Elena felt the subtle shifts in the suite's atmosphere, the heightened vigilance of Zane's men, the way their gazes lingered a moment longer on the horizon. It was the calm before his storm, a stillness pregnant with the promise of violence. Yet for Eleanor, this tension, this quiet anticipation of conflict, was no longer a source of paralyzing fear. Instead, it was a testament to Zane's control, a confirmation that he was steering them through the treacherous waters, and she, by his side, would be safe. She found herself becoming his quiet anchor, a soft, grounding presence amidst his intense preparations. She didn't offer advice or questions. She offered her silent, unwavering trust. Sometimes she would simply sit in the same room, her presence a soft counterpoint to the hard edges of his world. He didn't demand it, but she felt his awareness of her, a subtle softening in the lines of his shoulders, a brief, almost imperceptible glance in her direction that acknowledged her presence, her silent support. One evening, as the last sliver of twilight bled from the sky, Eleanor found her violin. It was not her own, but a beautiful instrument Zane had quietly delivered, a silent acknowledgement of her deepest need. Her fingers, stiff from disuse, trembled as she tightened the bowstrings, the familiar scent of rosin a comforting balm. She lifted the violin to her chin, the cool wood a connection to her true self. Tentatively, she drew the bow across the strings, a soft, hesitant melody filling the vast space. It was a simple tune, one she had practiced countless times, but tonight it carried the weight of her heart, her fear, her newfound solace. Zane, who had been hunched over his maps, straightened. He didn't speak, didn't move from his position by the table, but Elena felt his attention, absolute and unwavering. He turned slightly, his back still partially to her, but his head tilted. his focus entirely on the delicate sounds she coaxed from the instrument. The fierce lines of his jaw seemed to soften, his shoulders, usually so taut, eased a fraction. Her music, a gentle counterpoint to his dangerous world, seemed to reach him, to touch a place within him that his brutal existence rarely allowed. She played for a long time, moving from one quiet piece to another, losing herself in the familiar comfort of the notes. Each stroke of the bow, each intricate fingering, was a release, a silent conversation with the dangerous man who listened. When she finally lowered the violin, the silence that followed was not empty, but rich with unspoken understanding. He didn't praise her, didn't offer a single word of critique. He simply stood, his presence a powerful, silent affirmation. Zane Thorne, the city's most dangerous bad boy, who had carved a life of violence and command, accepted her music, her softness, her gentle presence. It was a rare, vulnerable moment, a glimpse into the depth of their intertwined reality. And for Eleanor, in that quiet exchange, her devotion to him deepened, an unshakable certainty that this formidable man, who accepted her delicate spirit into his harsh world, would protect her from anything, fueled by the very tenderness he allowed himself to feel for her. Zane Thorne moved through the high-rise suite with the focused intensity of a predator preparing for the hunt. The quiet moments of music, the gentle solace Eleanor had found, were now replaced by a chilling, purposeful energy that vibrated in the very air around him. He spoke in low, clipped tones to his men, his voice a gravelly murmur that carried commands heavy with unspoken weight. Diagrams spread across the dark table in his office were replaced by real-time feeds and secure comms, his every movement precise, deliberate, a master strategist orchestrating a complex, dangerous game. Elena watched him, her heart thrumming with a mixture of terror and an unshakable, almost intoxicating faith. He was setting the stage, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that the final confrontation was upon them. He came to her then, his massive frame silhouetted against the glittering expanse of the city lights. Elena instinctively rose, her gaze locking onto his, a silent question in her eyes. There was no softness in his expression, only a hard, unyielding resolve that demanded her full attention. His dark eyes, usually so intense, now burned with an even fiercer light, reflecting the controlled storm brewing within him. "Tonight, it ends," he stated, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. "The politician is making his move, and we're meeting him." Elena swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She felt the fear, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by the absolute trust that now bound her to him. "You understand your role, Elena?" His gaze was unwavering, piercing. It wasn't a question of her capability, but of her obedience, her implicit surrender to his will. She nodded, a silent affirmation. "Behind you," she whispered, remembering his earlier unspoken commands. A flicker, almost imperceptible, of something that might have been approval crossed his features. "Always behind me," he confirmed, his voice a low, gravelly command. "No matter what happens, no matter what you see, you stay behind me. You do not move, you do not question, you trust only my command. Your safety depends on your absolute trust." His words, stark and unembellished, resonated with the terrifying logic of his world. There was no room for hesitation, no space for defiance. Her life, her very existence was now entirely in his hands, tethered to his strength, dependent on her unwavering submission. And in that absolute surrender, Elena felt a strange, profound calm settle over her. She was a soft, fragile thing, but he was her shield, and she would move only at his will. The journey to the Fight Club was a blur of heightened senses. They moved through the city's underbelly in a heavily armored vehicle, Zane's men, a silent, formidable wall around them. Elena sat beside him, acutely aware of his presence, the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle scent of leather, and his unique, dangerous masculinity. The air outside felt charged, electric, heavy with the anticipation of impending violence. When they finally arrived, the atmosphere was a visceral assault. The underground club pulsed with a primal energy, a throbbing bass shaking the very concrete foundations. Harsh, flickering lights illuminated a sea of faces, a restless, roaring crowd hungry for spectacle. The air was thick with sweat, cheap liquor, and the raw scent of aggression. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the crowd's roar. She saw the familiar, buzzing neon exit sign above a distant doorway, a stark, mocking contrast to the raw, untamed world she now inhabited with Zane. It was a path not taken, a symbol of the life she had once known, now far behind her. Zane led her directly to the secure private box overlooking the ring, the same one where she had witnessed his power. He settled her into a shielded seat, his large hand briefly pressing against her shoulder, a silent reminder of her place, her purpose. Then he turned, his gaze sweeping over the arena, his focus absolute. Below, the ring glowed under harsh spotlights. Two fighters, massive and muscled, circled each other, their bodies glistening with sweat. The crowd screamed, a cacophony of shouts and cheers. This was it, the rigged fight, the distraction. Elena knew it was a carefully orchestrated spectacle, a diversion for the real threat, the true battle that would unfold. Her eyes, however, did not linger on the fighters. They were fixed irrevocably on Zane. He stood by the thick glass, his back to her, a colossus of power and control. His shoulders were broad, unyielding, a physical manifestation of the shield he had promised. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm that echoed the throb of the club. But in the center of that fear, a profound and unwavering belief in him took root. He had commanded her, and she had obeyed. He would protect her, and she would trust him implicitly, absolutely, no matter what storm he unleashed to keep her safe. The gauntlet had been thrown, and Elena, held captive by his will, waited for his storm to break. The roar of the crowd, the flashing lights, the primal energy of the fight club, it was a symphony of controlled chaos that Elena had, surprisingly, begun to find a strange rhythm in. Her eyes were fixed on Zane, his broad back to her, a monolith of unwavering control even amidst the pandemonium below. She felt the tremor of the floor, the collective gasp of the crowd as one fighter landed a brutal blow. But her world was Zane, his powerful presence the only true anchor in this volatile space. She trusted him, implicitly, to navigate the storm he had orchestrated. Then, without warning, the world plunged into absolute darkness. The harsh spotlights died, the thudding bass of the music vanished, and the roar of the crowd morphed into a collective shriek of disorientation and terror. An echoing silence, thick and terrifying, descended, broken only by frantic murmurs and the shuffle of panicked feet. Eleanor gasped, a cold dread seizing her, sharp and primal, clawing at her throat. She was blind, vulnerable, exposed. The protective glass of their box felt flimsy, inconsequential. Before she could even fully register the terror, a hand, rough and unfamiliar, clamped around her arm, pulling her with a desperate urgency. Not Zane's hand. This was different, colder, less certain, laced with a malicious intent that sent a fresh wave of ice-cold fear through her. A muffled grunt, a curse, sounded right outside the door to their secure box. The politicians' men. They were here. They were coming for her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a desperate bird trapped in a tightening fist, fighting for breath. But then, a different hand, immense and familiar, closed over the first, tearing it away with a savage, silent efficiency. Zane, His body, a wall of pure, unyielding muscle, was suddenly pressed against her back, shielding her completely. He was a fortress of flesh, her impenetrable bulwark against the sudden, horrifying reality. He pulled her even closer, so close she could feel the powerful beat of his heart against her spine, the raw heat of his body radiating through her clothes. The scent of him, clean sweat, leather, and something uniquely masculine and dangerous, filled her senses, a strange comfort amidst the chaos. The world erupted around them, no longer a controlled spectacle, but a brutal, visceral explosion of violence. Zane moved with a terrifying speed and precision. She heard the sickening thud of fists connecting, the sharp crack of bone, the guttural cries of men, all muffled by the solid wall of his back. He didn't just fight, he dismantled. She felt the jarring impact of each blow he delivered, the ripple of power through his body, and the sickening weight of blows he absorbed. Blows meant for her that thudded against his broad shoulders and back. He was a human shield, taking every hit, bearing every brutal force so that she wouldn't have to. A chair splintered nearby, a harsh shattering sound, and then another sickening impact as Zane used it as an extension of his own brutal will. He was using everything, every weapon at his disposal to keep her safe. The screams of the crowd, once distant, were now closer, laced with genuine terror as the fight spilled beyond the ring. Elena pressed herself tighter against him, her face buried against his back, inhaling the unique, dangerous scent of him. She was terrified, trembling uncontrollably, the raw violence of his world washing over her, but she was safe, utterly, absolutely safe. His body was a shield, his fury a raging storm that protected her from everything. She could feel his breath, ragged and powerful, against her hair. He was a monster, a brutal, unyielding force, a storm unleashed, but he was her monster, fighting to keep her. The world outside his shield was a maelstrom of violence, but behind him, wrapped in the terrifying cocoon of his protection, Elena found a profound, unwavering peace. He would tear down the world for her, and in his terrifying, absolute devotion, she found an addictive, unsettling solace. She trusted him, implicitly. He was her protector, and she was irrevocably, utterly his. The world was no longer dark, but a swirling, violent kaleidoscope of flickering emergency lights and the stark, brutal glow of remaining club fixtures. Zane stood over the last of the crumpled figures, his chest heaving, his powerful body a canvas of fresh bruises and streaks of blood that glistened under the chaotic light. He wasn't just victorious, he was a force of nature, a brutal, unstoppable storm that had torn through everything threatening her. Eleanor, still pressed against his back, felt the tremor of his muscles, the raw power that still hummed through him. He was terrifying, magnificent, and utterly hers. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned. His dark eyes, usually so controlled, burned with a primal intensity, sweeping over her, assessing every inch of her, searching for any sign of harm. His gaze, heavy and absolute, locked onto hers, a silent question, a desperate need for confirmation. Elena, her body still trembling from the terror and the aftermath of his unleashed fury, could only nod, a silent, tearful affirmation that she was unharmed. In that moment, seeing the blood, the bruises, the sheer, unyielding force of him, she felt a profound, almost dizzying sense of safety. He had done this for her. He had endured this for her. Just as a fragile calm began to settle over the carnage, a new sound pierced the air, growing louder, more insistent, the wail of sirens. Blue and red lights began to flash through the grimy windows, painting the chaos in stark, official hues. The club, once a den of controlled violence, was about to be raided. Heavy boots pounded on the concrete, and then uniformed officers burst through the main entrance, their flashlights cutting through the dimness, weapons raised. The remaining crowd scattered, screaming, but Elena remained rooted to the spot. Shielded by Zane's towering presence, the officers taking in the scene of destruction, the unconscious men scattered like broken dolls, honed in on Zane, his bloodied knuckles, his dangerous aura. "Step away from her, sir," one of them commanded, his voice sharp, authoritative, yet edged with caution as he eyed Zane's formidable frame. "Are you all right, ma'am? Are you being held against your will?" The flashlight beam, cold and impersonal, cut across Elena's face. She flinched, but Zane's large hand, still warm and solid, subtly pressed against the small of her back, anchoring her. The sudden official presence was jarring, a stark contrast to the raw, visceral protection he had just offered. They offered a different kind of safety, a legal one, a return to the world she knew, but it felt hollow, distant, utterly insufficient compared to the living. Breathing shield beside her. Another officer approached, his expression sympathetic, trying to draw her away. "Come on, miss. We can get you out of here, far away from all of this, far away from him." He gestured vaguely at Zane, his tone implying Zane was the source of all danger, not her protector. Eleanor looked at the officer, then back at Zane. He stood still, a colossus of battered muscle and unwavering resolve, his eyes fixed on her, waiting. He didn't speak, didn't move to influence her, but his silent presence was a powerful, undeniable force. She saw the blood on his forehead, the cut on his lip, the way his knuckles were swollen, and knew each injury was a testament to his devotion, a mark of the blows he had taken for her. He was dangerous, yes, a man born of shadows and violence, but he was her danger, her protector. The choice was clear, startlingly so. The safe, predictable life they offered felt like a betrayal now, a return to the very world that had cast her aside. Zane, in his terrifying absolute dominance, was the only truth she recognized. He had claimed her, protected her, and in her submission to his will, she had found an unshakable strength. Without hesitation, Elena took a step, not away from him, but towards him. Her soft hand reached out, finding his arm, scarred and powerful, and she threaded her arm through his, clinging to him. The rough fabric of his hoodie, splattered with blood, both his and his enemy's, was still draped around her, a tangible symbol of his shield, a second skin he had given her in the chaos. She looked directly at the officer, her voice clear and unwavering, imbued with a newfound strength she hadn't known she possessed. "He's the only protection I trust," she stated, her gaze resolute, her hand tightening around Zane's arm. "He's the only one who kept me safe, the only one who ever truly will." A ripple of surprise went through the officers, their expressions shifting from concern to confusion. Zane's body, solid and unyielding, remained still, but Elena felt a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in him, a tightening of his muscles, a quiet acknowledgement of her definitive choice. His dark eyes, which had held a silent question, now held a profound, unwavering certainty. She was his, and she had just declared it to the world, irrevocably, utterly, forever bound to the dangerous man who was her unbreakable shield. The flashing emergency lights painted the scene in stark, chaotic strokes, illuminating the carnage and the stunned faces of the police officers. Elena, her arm threaded through Zane's, felt the ripple of surprise, then suspicion from the uniforms. They saw a bloody, dangerous man and a seemingly fragile woman, clearly a victim, but their narrative, their assumption of her helplessness, shattered against the unyielding wall of her declaration. "He's the only protection I trust." The words, spoken with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed, hung in the charged air, sealing their fate. Zane's large hand, scarred and powerful, tightened subtly around her arm, a silent acknowledgement, a deep, resonant hum of possession that vibrated through her. He didn't look at the officers. His dark eyes remained fixed on Elena, a silent question in their depths, confirming her resolve. When she met his gaze, unwavering, A flicker of something profound, almost tender, crossed his features before settling back into his usual mask of formidable control. The aftermath was a blur of legal maneuvering, hushed conversations, and the relentless hum of Zane's influence. Elena watched, a silent observer, as he moved through the labyrinthine corridors of the law with the same ruthless efficiency he commanded the underground club. His lawyers, sharp and impeccably dressed, appeared as if summoned from the very fabric of the city. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes deferential to Zane, their arguments precise and unyielding. Eleanor understood little of the legal jargon, but she understood the power behind it, the silent weight of Zane's will, bending the world to his purpose. He ensured the politician, exposed by his own illegal activities and the testimony of his captured men, faced a swift and brutal downfall. The news reports, once hinting at a missing witness, now screamed headlines of corruption and scandal. Elena, legally cleared, her name painstakingly kept out of the public eye by Zane's ironclad control, felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. The threat, the shadow that had clung to her like a shroud, was finally lifted. She was free not to return to her old life, but to embrace the new one Zane had carved out for them. Zane, however, was not content with merely putting out fires. Elena saw his focus shift, his powerful mind already building, expanding. He began the meticulous process of legitimizing his businesses, transitioning from the shadows to a more public, yet still formidable presence. Meetings were held in sleek, modern offices overlooking the Strip, not dimly lit back rooms. His men, still a silent, watchful legion, now wore sharp suits instead of leather, their loyalty no less absolute. He was forging a new empire, one built on the same foundations of power and respect, but now gleaming under the harsh, unforgiving light of the city. Elena stayed resolutely by his side, her faith in him absolute, an unshakable certainty that had grown from the ashes of her shattered past. She adapted, her soft nature finding its own space within the demanding, powerful currents of his world. She didn't question his decisions. She trusted them, implicitly. His commands, once a source of terror, were now a comforting cadence, a familiar rhythm that guided her. She found herself watching him, learning the nuances of his authority, the subtle shifts in his gaze that spoke volumes more than any words. The challenges were still there, the lingering whispers of his past, the envious glances from those who resented his power, but now they faced them as one. Their connection, forged in fear and tempered by absolute protection, solidified into an undeniable partnership. She was his quiet strength, the gentle counterpoint to his formidable power, and he, in turn, was her unyielding shield, her absolute protector. Zane's power, once a tool of the underworld, was now channeled into building a secure, impregnable future. A future that undeniably included her. He made no grand declarations, no flowery promises. Instead, he simply acted, every decision, every expansion, every move, subtly, irrevocably, entwining her life with his. Eleanor, once a shy violin student, terrified of breaking rules, found herself not just accepting, but embracing her place by his side. In his dominance, in his absolute claim, she discovered not just safety, but a profound, almost addictive sense of belonging. She was his, and under his formidable protection she felt more truly herself, more truly alive than she ever had before. Months later, the city of Las Vegas still buzzed with its characteristic frenetic energy, but for Elena, the rhythm had profoundly shifted. The neon glow outside her window now held a different kind of warmth, a familiar backdrop to a life that had found its unexpected harmony. Above the controlled thud of heavy bags and the grunts of training fighters, the melodic sounds of children's laughter and the sweet, sometimes clumsy strains of violins now drifted. Her small, bright studio, filled with the scent of rosin and clean wood, was a sanctuary of soft sounds and gentle instruction, perfectly nestled above the now legal gym Zane had opened. Elena moved among her young students, her hands guiding their tiny fingers, her voice soft with encouragement. She found a deep, quiet joy in sharing her love for music, her own dreams now blossoming in a way she had never imagined. Her worn violin case, its faint crack a distant memory, sat proudly on a stand, no longer a symbol of struggle, but of resilience. Downstairs, the gym was a testament to Zane's unyielding will, a stark, powerful space where muscle and discipline reigned. He remained the dangerous bad boy mothers still warned their daughters about, his reputation preceding him like a silent, formidable shadow. His name, Zane Thorn, still carried a weight of power and a hint of untamed menace in the city's whispers. Yet for Elena, those whispers were a shield, a constant reminder of the formidable man who had claimed her, and the impenetrable fortress he had built around their world. She felt his presence even when he was downstairs, the subtle thrum of his authority vibrating up through the floorboards. It was a comforting hum, a constant reassurance of her safety. Her submission to his will, once born of fear, had blossomed into an unshakable trust, a deep, abiding peace that settled every corner of her being. She no longer questioned, she simply knew. His decisions were her protection, his commands her haven. One afternoon, as her last student packed up, Zane appeared in the doorway of her studio. He filled the frame, his shoulders broad and powerful, his dark eyes sweeping the room, then settling on her. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched taut across his chest, emphasizing the coiled strength beneath. The scent of him, clean sweat, leather, and something uniquely masculine, filled the small space, a potent, familiar anchor. Elena's heart gave a soft, familiar flutter. She didn't need words. She felt the subtle shift in the air, the way his presence commanded attention, even hers. He walked over to her, his large, scarred hands capable of such devastating force, reaching not for her, but for her violin. He took it gently, his calloused fingers carefully testing the tension of the bowstrings. "Too loose," he rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly sound that resonated through her. It was a quiet observation, a simple statement, yet it held the weight of his absolute knowledge, his quiet attentiveness to every detail of her life. Elena watched, mesmerized, as his powerful hands, the ones that had shattered bone and commanded an empire, now performed the delicate task of tightening her bowstrings. His movements were precise, controlled, an unexpected tenderness in their focus. He didn't rush, didn't falter, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a silent testament to his devotion, a quiet act of service that spoke volumes more than any declaration of love. He was the most dangerous man she knew, yet he was the one ensuring her instrument was perfectly tuned, perfectly ready for her gentle music. When he finished, he handed the violin back to her, his fingers brushing hers. Then, his gaze, dark and intense, dropped to her hands, to the knuckles that had once trembled with fear when she opened the wrong door. He lifted her hand, his thumb stroking softly over her skin, and then slowly, deliberately, he brought it to his lips. His kiss was soft, a warm press against her knuckles, a silent, powerful testament to their eternal bond. It was a promise, a claim, a gentle reassurance that reverberated through her very soul. She was safe, cherished, absolutely, irrevocably under his protection. Her soft strength, once so fragile, was now perfectly intertwined with his formidable power, a beautiful, unexpected symphony. Elena Vance, the good girl who had stumbled into the wrong room, had found her forever under Zane Thorn's unyielding sky, utterly, happily his. If you enjoyed this story, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to Tales of Power and Desire to keep up with our intense romances.